Yeah, that's a great question. I would say yes, it is, though one needs to be wise. There are, if we start by saying, well, I'm not going to watch anything which has violence, which has killing, which has explicit sex, which is immoral. If we think about that, there are parts of the Bible that you'd have to exclude. Take, for one of the most extreme examples, the raping to death of the Levite's concubine in the book of Judges, or the example of Amnon, one of the sons of David, David's eldest son, raping his half-sister Tamar. This is a terrible story, but it's there in God's word for us to read. And so we're not to make arbitrary decisions and say, violence or sexual immorality or explicit sex, is off limits. The Song of Solomon is very sensual. It's very explicit sexually. If we said, well, blasphemy is off limits, the book of Job is full of blasphemy because Job's comforters say things about God which are not true, that they're ultimately blasphemous. So we need to think a little more carefully about it. I need to ask the question always, what is the context of this violence? What is the context of this sexual immorality? What's the context of this blasphemy? What's the context of this explicit sexuality? Is it one which is ultimately upbuilding? Is it one which is ultimately true? Or is it one which is intended, for example, to encourage me to be sexually immoral, or encourage me to do senseless acts of violence? So I do need to ask some questions. I don't just go out and watch anything. I want to watch things which are good in the sense that there is some truth in them about the human condition. Let's think of, if you think of an example, if you think of the film The Shawshank Redemption, which I think is from a Stephen King novel. There's some very explicit violence in that, but it is a wonderful movie because it's ultimately deeply redemptive. And there are many other examples like that. There's lots of violence in The Lord of the Rings. I'm sure that was a PG-13 at least. I don't usually pay attention to what the ratings are. I'm much more interested in what is the content of this movie, how well is this movie made. But if you take The Lord of the Rings, where there's lots of very dramatic violence in it, some of it extremely wicked, the context is an ultimately thoroughly redemptive context. And so yes, I'm going to be happy to watch that. Now, I have to ask very practical questions. If I've got little children, I read The Lord of the Rings to my 3 sons when they were 7, 8, 9 years old, and they loved it. But I rather doubt that I would have taken them to watch The Lord of the Rings at 7 years old, because I don't know that they could have coped at that age with the visualization of the Black Riders in the story, who were very evil. They were fine listening to it. Not that they lacked imaginations, they had wonderful imaginations, but the visualization of it is so powerful. There are many little children for whom that would be rather challenging to watch. So I do have to ask practical questions, both for my children and for myself. I'm sure everybody out there has seen movies which they wish they had never seen because they create images which one cannot erase from one's mind. And as you think about sexuality, for example, that's a particularly important issue here. There are films I've seen that I wish I hadn't seen. Films even going back before I became a Christian, many, many years ago, when I was 21 years old. I wish I hadn't seen them because there are these images there, and you pray that God will erase them from your memory, and you try to forget them. So we do have to be wise about what we watch. So I'm not saying go and watch anything, but I need to ask some deeper questions than simply, is there sex here? Is there violence here? Is there blasphemy here? I need to ask something about the context and the intent of the film before I make those choices.